any association with this prolific, internationally famous paedophile and sex groomer should have been a red flag.
Virginia is very clear. She wasn't talking about one man. It was that whole world. She's talking about the 1%. That 1% who think they can do anything.
His incredibly long letter, it fit the language of the rest of the birthday notices to Epstein perfectly. They all had that kind of like grim, icky, euphemistic chatter about sort of sexuality. And the thing that's hanging over this whole conversation is the fact that Donald Trump is in that book as well.
And does it actually put more heat on him that Mandelson has gone over his relationship with Epstein? Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. For the third time in his political career, Peter Mandelson has fallen from high office in a scandal linked to rich and powerful men. This time it was his relationship with the disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein that proved his undoing. Sacked from his role as UK ambassador to the US after leaked emails showed him offering support for Epstein even after a sex offence conviction. Downing Street said the Prime Minister found the depth and extent of the relationship reprehensible. But questions are now being asked about Sir Keir Starmer's judgement in appointing him in the first place, given Lord Mandelson has attracted, some would say courted, controversy throughout his career. He was widely considered to be doing a good job in Washington, though, with a good rapport with President Trump. Is that relationship now damaged? To discuss this, I'm joined by the filmmaker Richard Sanders, who produced the Dispatches documentary that first revealed the friendship between the two men, the Labour peer Ayesha Hazarika, and the author and political journalist Ian Dunt, who has written extensively on Lord Mandelson. Well, Ayesha first. He had to go, didn't he?
Absolutely. I mean, I think many people felt that when the extent of his close personal friendship with Jeffrey Epstein came to light, people knew that they were friends, but I think the level of kind of affection, I mean, they felt like they were love letters being written. And, to use colloquial phrase, I mean, they kind of gave everybody the ick. I mean, it really was, some of it was quite kind of stomach churning anyway. But to have these letters to somebody who, was really kind of the modern day equivalent in America of what Jimmy Savile was in the United Kingdom. So absolutely, without question, he definitely had to go.
Ian Dunt, it's been a shameful episode and shaming to Britain as well in the eyes of the US, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite hard. There's not a lot more of our national reputation for us to uphold at the moment, and we're really struggling to keep what we do have. This isn't really helping. We had a really good ambassador to the US. We had Karen Pierce, seasoned diplomat, not the kind of person who ends up on the kind of islands that we're talking about here. Had a long career stretching back to the 80s, starting in Japan, had managed to, build the bases in that kind of subtle, old-fashioned British Foreign Office sort of way across the spectrum in the US. And then you get this decision, which felt kind of weird at the time, being, we need a political operator in the US. You think, well, you don't really need it. You've got a really good ambassador. Why would you be making any of these changes? And at that point, we knew everything that we know now. I mean, fine, so a few emails have come to light, but it wasn't like the basic facts. It was said today the material facts. The material facts have not changed at all.
Well, let me bring in Richard on that point, Richard Sanders, because we made this film together back in 2019. The government pops up today and says, well, there's a material change now in what we knew about Mandelson's relationship with Epstein. What did we find out in 2019 that we broadcast to the world?
Yeah, it was very frustrating, really, because back in 2019, we had an interviewee. He was an anonymous interviewee. He was a close friend of Epstein's. Interesting man, a very, very wealthy man, had his own yacht, had various connections with the intelligence services himself. And he told us this extraordinary story of visiting Epstein while he was supposedly in prison. Sort of very, very luxurious prison. And while he's there, he gets this phone call.
Because he was allowed out on day release to do sort of calls in his office.
Yes, I mean, and he was only in prison for a year. And he gets this extraordinary phone call from this gentleman called P.T., and he's sort of listening to it, he's trying to work out what it is. And the phone call itself is interesting. This person wants Epstein to arrange a meeting. Once the phone was hung up, it became quite clear that PT was Peter Mandelson. And it was clear that they were very close friends. Yeah. The tone of it was they were very close friends. And also, Peter Mandelson didn't deny this at the time. What he said is, I have no recollection that meeting, which is a rather different thing from denying something.
We got a lot of legal pushback at the time,
A
didn't we?
lot of legal pushback, but it evaporated after we'd actually gone to it.
Yeah.
But he also said an interesting thing. He said, why would I need Jeffrey Epstein to make my bookings for me in New York? Which is precisely the point. Why indeed?
And we'll come to, why Mandelson was sort of seduced by rich and powerful men in a second. But Ayesha, all of this, given what we knew back in 2019 that we put out on air and what has dribbled out since, it raises serious questions, doesn't it, about Sir Keir Starmer's judgment in appointing Peter Mandelson to this plum job?
Well, it's now coming to light that concerns were raised. The Labour peer Maurice Glassman, who's very close to Morgan McSweeney, who is Keir Starmer's chief of staff, it said that he submitted a memo, close to the time saying, look, I think this is a difficult appointment. But I think the calculation was from Keir Starmer's team that the prospect of negotiating with Donald Trump was going to be so difficult, particularly when a lot of people in the cabinet had sort of slagged Donald Trump off over the years. You needed somebody...
Yeah, but including Peter Mandelson, though.
Absolutely. But you needed somebody who could kind of sort of be a Trump whisperer, who could move in those sort of circles, which Peter is very good at doing because he does like wealth and he likes wealthy men and powerful men, as we've seen. But I think what should have been a big red flag is the fact that anybody with a close friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, massive, massive red flag. Don't forget the Prince Andrew story and saga in our country, the Emily Maitlis interview, and the fact that he kept his friendship going with Jeffrey Epstein even after he had been convicted, and the fact that, Prince Andrew had to be sort of discarded from the royal family. I mean, any association with this prolific, internationally famous paedophile and sex groomer should have been a red flag. But I think the calculation was that the government, and I kind of understand from a business point of view, from a trade point of view, they were just thinking about, look, we don't want to get massive tariffs from Trump. We want to have a good deal with Trump. But I think you also have to remember your values in this.
Yeah. Ian Dunt, he should never have been appointed in the first place.
No, I mean, obviously not. And then having been appointed, they needed to be much quicker off the mark of realising what the significance of what's happened this week was. In fact, they failed. And so yesterday you get Prime Minister in PMQ speaking very confidently about something that you're looking at him and thinking is that line going to hold? It doesn't feel like it's going to hold. Sending out Minister this morning and the Immigration Minister to hold that line, when you're thinking this line is not going to hold. So that's someone there who's not going to forget the fact that they've been sent out to do that, who will be a bit more reticent about going out to hold the government line next time. Once you build a lot of people around you who feel that way, who question your judgment, who don't know if they'll be hung out to dry and made to look a fool by the fact that you're going to U-turn on something that you currently seem terribly confident about, that's when things start to become quite difficult for you in Parliament. That's what scuppered plenty of Conservative prime ministers over the last, decade and a bit. So no, I would worry quite a lot about the decision-making that lay behind both the original appointment and the things that have happened this week.
And Peter Mandelson has already been turfed out of cabinet jobs in the past.
Well,
and you were there when some of that happened.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's very much seen as the sort of Icarus, kind of character in the Labour Party. He was, he had to resign because of a loan he took from a man called Jeffrey Robinson. He then had to resign over an issue about passports for two Indian businessmen, the Hinduja brothers, although he was subsequently cleared of that. So he is somebody that is kind of a high risk, high voltage person.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that I'd just like to sort of say in all of this, Cathay, is that, look, this new Labour government has also got a really important mission, and that is to halve violence against women and girls. And it's really proud to be a party, even though we haven't had a female leader, we're very proud of delivering for women, particularly in terms of violence against women. And I think a lot of women in the Labour Party were really horrified about this. We've just had this big grooming scandal in this country, the Pakistani grooming scandal. I met some victims recently in Parliament, and it was so painful listening to them.
Yeah.
And the long tail of this kind of abuse from women who were groomed from a young age by paedophiles and raped for sex. People think these are crimes that happened 20 years ago, get over it, move on. No, for these women, the long tail of these crimes. I mean, Virginia Giuffre took her own life. And I think in the midst of all this, who's up, who's down, what kind of characters, Peter, there are victims who are every day reliving this horror and trauma.
Well, and Richard, it was very clear in that just excruciating birthday book that we saw, 238 pages, the running joke about Epstein's appetite for young women. I mean, horrifying. But there'll be other people now sweating because they know that they've looked at what's happened to Peter Mandelson. They know that they might be next. Tell us about that.
Well, there's a lot of people. You see, when we did the film in 2019, all this business about the Epstein list and will the Epstein list be produced, I don't think it's quite as mysterious as that. There had been a lot of legal proceedings over the years, and we looked into those legal proceedings really carefully. And there was a massive documentation online. And when you really picked it apart, you got, a lot of names, all very rich and very powerful, a lot of them very well known, some world leaders in there. Now, in the year after our film, I got to know Virginia quite well. I used to speak to Virginia on the phone all the time. And she was very keen to go after them. She wanted to go after them, but obviously it's the legal implications. You're going to get sued by these people.
But is that going to start happening now, do you think? I mean, because there's talk, the Epstein victims are talking about sort of putting together their own client list and getting out there, naming and shaming.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would all depend on the lawyers. I mean, we discussed this, making follow-up films, and the problem was the risk of being sued by extremely wealthy people.
Are you sure, a client list, is that where this now goes?
Well, I think where this should go now is instead of just talking about the careers of very, rich men, I think this needs to move to the victims and justice for the victims. There are many, many men implicated in this. This is a very elite network of men. And I think when Peter Mandelson did that interview with The Sun and he said, my heart goes out to those victims, I hope, and I sincerely hope he did mean that. And I think one thing he could do, because nobody is coming forward to help those victims and give any evidence or talk to them about what they know. And that's what, will move this case forward. So I would like to see him reach out to the victims groups now and sit down with them and tell people what he saw and what he knew to help these victims. I
mean, there's no implication that he was involved in the abuse in any way whatsoever. I should just make that clear. But Ian, what do you think of that suggestion that Peter Mandelson should sort of help expose and name and shame some of these rich and very powerful men?
Yeah, that'll be helpful. I don't think it's likely, but I mean, it would be encouraging if we were to see something like that. I mean, I think we've understood the pattern with him. It's strange, because we just had like a summer of Oasis and everything's about the late 90s. Now I just feel like I'm back in the late 90s. This is exactly the same story that we were dealing with, like 1998. It's the first time he had a resignation. It's the same. The resignation is always the same. It's always the same circumstance. It's like, should you really have been friends with this tremendously wealthy man? When he was EU commissioner, by the way, in between these two lives, exactly the same stories coming out. Should you really have been seeing this Russian oligarch? Should you really have been hanging out with this person from Microsoft when they were under investigation? Over and over, it's the same story with him. When someone exhibits the kind of behavior you see like that just happening over and over with regularity, unchanged over about 30 decades, you sort of think, I very much doubt this person's going to change anytime soon. And I'm afraid I wouldn't have much hope that he will.
What is it about, wealthy men that appeals to Peter Mandelson?
I mean, for certain people, that is a very attractive kind of social milieu to be in. And I guess he's one of them. What's interesting about his incredibly long letter was that it fit the language of the rest of the birthday notices to Epstein perfectly. They all had that kind of like grim, icky, euphemistic chatter about sort of sexuality. And you saw the same with Manson stuff about the yum this and that. It was icky, right? But it was the exact language that all the other letters were using. He clearly fit in that society and that kind of social context.
Ayesha?
Well, I mean, I think Peter has always been very seduced by wealth, and he's obviously always been attracted to it. And I know Peter reasonably well. I've worked with him over the years, and I think for people who are very, very close to him, the frustration is he has a great political mind, and he's also his own worst enemy in the sense that he has this ability to self-sabotage his career. And he is obviously, like a moth to the flame, attracted to extreme wealth and these very particular types of very wealthy, very powerful men. You don't really get that many powerful, wealthy women, so it is powerful, wealthy men.
Ian, how's the state visit going to go now?
That's going to be really difficult. I mean, mostly because, of course, the thing that's hanging over this whole conversation is the fact that Donald Trump is in that book as well. And despite the fact that, the far right in the US have been pretending for over a decade now that they're tremendously worked up by elite networks that they've completely imagined in their head, the second that they get presented with a real elite network that implicates their hero, they suddenly don't have anything to say. Nevertheless, he is in that book, and in any rational world, that would be the first thing and the only thing that we would be talking about over the last week. As a globe, as a world, that's what we would be discussing.
And does it actually put more heat on him that Mandelson has gone over his relationship with Epstein?
It's going to make it a tremendously difficult thing for Keir Starmer to navigate, which is the conversation about Peter Mandelson on the one hand, and what he needs to do to keep Donald Trump sweet during a state visit on the other. And there's a very small area in between those two circles that you can operate within in a way that isn't going to upset attitudes on one side or the other. And I think Starmer's going to really struggle with that. That is a problem of his own making. And if they'd been a little bit more cognizant and strategic about the way that these things could work out, that problem would not necessarily have had to have taken place.
Ian is right. Look, Peter Mandelson not being here orchestrating and conducting this state visit will make it more difficult. And of course, there will be more scrutiny and more heat on Donald Trump now because of the Epstein connection. And of course, all of this also makes it quite difficult for uncomfortable for the royal family because of the Prince Andrew link as well. So this is all going to be very, very tense. But also we've got a new foreign secretary as well who will be kind of navigating this. I mean, it helps that David Lammy does have a good relationship with JD Vance. I'm sure David Lammy, as Deputy Prime Minister, will now probably move into quite an important position. But I don't think we should kid ourselves. This state visit is going to be quite tricky.
Just on the point about Trump, it's very important to bear in mind
who denies any wrongdoing when it comes to Epstein.
And as Virginia was quite clear that she'd never been abused by Trump. Epstein's world was fundamentally a democratic world, as was Harvey Weinstein's. Okay, Bloomberg have 18,000 of Epstein's emails. All right, I think Trump's name pops up 3 times. There's a story that is very odd. It hasn't been picked up more. Yesterday, the Times reported that there's a memo Peter Mandelson sent to Tony Blair in 2002 saying, you really ought to meet this man. Now, it wasn't meet him to discuss this or something specific. It was just in general, he's a useful person to know. I'm amazed. No one seems to have asked Tony Blair, did you meet him?
Don't worry, we've been bidding for him. But I mean, how damaging is this whole thing to Trump, though? I mean, I take your point that this was a sort of a bigger problem for the Democrats, but, Trump happens to be the one in power. So how problematic is the whole Epstein thing for him?
I think it is problematic. Trump and he fell out at a certain point. Before Epstein went to prison, they fell out and that relationship stopped. So I'm not sure how much more there is to come out about Trump than has already come out. I mean, I used to talk to Virginia a lot about...
Well, that's been bad enough, though.
It's been bad enough, but I used to talk to Virginia quite a lot about Trump. He was sleazy. You'd see him around. He was a sleazy, unpleasant presence. But other men loomed much larger in her memory.
Just coming back to the state visit and sort of picking up the pieces from this mess, who will be, I mean, we know we've got an acting ambassador, but who's going to be the permanent replacement? Or who should be? Karen Pierce comes back?
Well, I mean, look, I do agree with what Ian said. I mean, Karen Pierce was a really well-respected figure. I think having a female ambassador is a really good thing. She was somebody who, the White House felt that they could work with. She was really respected by the department. And I think as well, civil servants and the diplomatic service were always felt slightly uncomfortable about this top job being a political appointment rather than being an appointment that went to sort of a top diplomat who had really, cut their teeth around the world. And
so it should revert to that in your view?
Well, I just think after everything that's happened, I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, let's see what Number 10 decide to do, but I think bringing Karen back would be no bad thing.
Ian, has it got to be sort of apolitical now?
Hopefully we would go back to the default setting and go for that kind of person. There is a reason that we have these people in those kind of jobs and they don't typically get themselves into trouble like this. Yeah. It would also be quite good, I think, for the Labour government to just have a think about the kind of language and principles that it established at the beginning when it came into government. We will be cleaner than clean. We are going to show that you can kill populism by virtue of just showing like we are going to get rid of sleaze. We're going to get rid of this kind of behavior. Now we've seen things that I think are very minor. I thought the Angela Rayner thing was very, very minor and extremely forgivable and a bit silly on tax. It's nowhere near the kind of
Other people see it differently.
Other people do see it differently, but I mean, I would be surprised if you went to most people with, what do you think the moral severity of these two stories is last week or this week? Most people would obviously think this is a much graver kind of situation that we're talking about this week. So on that basis, it's a good chance for them to say, hang on a minute, let's make sure we're living up to that language and those principles that we expressed when we first came into government.
I just think so kind of fascinating from a kind of a feminist point of view. It just shows you about this kind of network of these incredibly powerful, these elite men, and the sort of impunity with which they thought they could behave, and the fact that they earned a lot of money, or they ran these big businesses, or they held these great positions in office.
But has that changed now?
I mean, I hope so. I don't know. And I think so many people will look at this and just think, you know, this sort of inherently sort of patriarchal sort of behavior, and this sort of behavior without impunity, men who clearly felt that they could just get away with it because these were the masters of the universe. These were kind of these global emperors, and they were above the law, and they were above morality, and they were above decency. I mean, and the tentacles of Jeffrey Epstein go, you know, as you say, it's not just one political party. It was Democrats, Republicans, you know, the Labour, I'm sure there's political parties all over the world.
Business, banking,
the royal family. You know, there is a nexus of this absolutely like disgusting, venal, sickening behaviour, which these men for decades have just been able to get away with.
And so that's Virginia used to talk about that all the time. She was very clear. She wasn't talking about one man. She wasn't even talking about the sort of circle around him. It was that whole world he moved to. She used to talk about the 1%. That 1% who think they can do anything.
Well, let's talk about the politics more broadly. Ayesha, you're well plugged into the entire parliamentary party, of course. How disgruntled are people?
Well, I mean, there's no way to sort of sugar the pill. I mean, it has been a very, very difficult couple of weeks for the Labour Party.
I mean, it's been disastrous, hasn't it?
Well, of course, it's been very, very difficult. I mean, coming back, doing a reset, and then at the end of that week, you know, losing Angela Rayner, who, you know, I think she had to go given what she did, but it was a great loss to the party because she was a really good communicator. She was held in a great amount of affection. She was a great campaigner. And now, a week on, losing, you know, one of the kind of prime jobs in the government, you know, in terms of the sort of trinkets given out, it's terrible. And I think the members and the Parliamentary Labour Party are definitely sort of jittery, but they're not just sort of jittery in an internal way. They want this Labour government to succeed, right? They really want this Labour government to succeed because the alternative is absolutely terrifying. The prospect of staring down the barrel at Prime Minister Nigel Farage is absolutely terrifying. For
Labour's incompetence is bringing that day further forward by the minute.
Listen, things have not been going well, and the Labour Party does, and the kind of leadership absolutely needs to get a grip. But in terms of where the mood of the party is, it's very worried, and it wants the kind of leadership, and it wants to pull together to sort of do good for the country and tell that story. But at the moment, it just feels like there's so many sort of scandals happening, and they want this Labour government to, as Ian said, do what they promised to do, which is come in, change the country, fix this country for the better, you know, and get on with building a sort of positive Britain. And they want to move on from these distractions.
Ian?
I just think anyone at the moment who is like, even from the centre right to the sort of socialist left, is just desperate for this government to succeed. Because you're seeing the stuff in the wings, and the stuff in the wings is not the conservatism that we're used to. We're having it's somewhat like a mainstream politician stand up and talk about basically like mass deportations, like it's like some kind of normal policy. It's a far right policy. That's what it is. It's far right talk. It's far right rhetoric. We know that there is this poison, and yet when you look for some kind of leadership, what you see from the top of the Labour Party is just this sort of sense of like we are unwilling to speak about our values. Like, we're just not going to say, we're unwilling to speak with any kind of emotion at all. The only criticism we will make of even a policy as extreme as that is, like, we think that you've constructed it incompetently. It's like, that's not the problem with the policy. The problem with the policy is that it's a moral obscenity. So there is just no sense of a progressive voice, seemingly like in this country at all. It's really hard to find it anywhere, to the point that you end up with, the leader of the Green Party and the FT. Like, that's where you're getting your progress. It's a ridiculous state of affairs.
So, Ayesha, if the leadership doesn't get its act together, is Keir Starmer potentially out of a job before the next election?
I don't think so, because I do think that even though people are disgruntled, remember, I think you have to just look back through history. It is not often that Labour wins a general election. Keir Starmer is only the 7th Labour Prime Minister in the history of British politics, right? And so I think even though people are definitely not happy at the moment and grumbling, I think people do also remember that we don't often have a Labour government. It was hard fought for. And to be fair to Keir Starmer, he is the person that got the party over the line for many, many years. Labour is very, very good at losing elections. He did something that no Labour leader's done for a long time. And I've worked for a number of different Labour leaders. He got Labour over the line. But what he's got to do is he's got to sort of get his team together. And look, there are some really important things that are happening. Things are starting to turn a corner with the NHS. There's record investment going into infrastructure and planning. The defence spending is doing lots of good work for kind of jobs up and down the country. Massive shipbuilding coming back to Scotland with this Norway deal. So
and the economy is stalling, and immigration is still sky high.
But it's wrong to say that there's it's not balanced, say that there's nothing good or nothing positive happening. But Labour absolutely has to get a grip. And one thing you said emotionally, and that's so important. It's no point just pointing to charts and graphs going, look what's happening. It's about having an emotional connection and having an emotional dialogue, because people out there right now are so anxious. They're anxious about the economy. They're anxious about immigration. They're anxious about crime, antisocial behaviour, what they're seeing. And Labour has got to be more on the front foot of better kind of speaking a language that connects with people.
Yeah, but Ian, Keir Starmer's never been capable of speaking that language. Do you see him safe in his job until the next election? Or do you think if things keep on, Farage is still ahead in the polls for the next year, 2, whatever, then it's curtains for Keir?
You can hear the whispers. I mean, even the way that people have been talking about Andy Burnham, in this slightly sci-fi sort of way. It's quite hard to see the blocking of how you get him into Parliament. But, even that, the sort of, these attempts at just finding some kind of alternative, you can hear the whispers starting to build now. Still, the good money would be on Keir Starmer leading into the next election, absolutely.
Ayesha, finally, you're in the Lords for Labour. You looking forward to sharing those benches with Peter Mandelson?
Well, let's see if he, comes back and wants to. I mean, he might want to stay in America for a while. That'll be a decision for him.
Would he be welcome in the Lords, though?
You'll have to ask some of his other colleagues.
Well, I'm asking you. Do you welcome him back to the Lords? I mean, is it appropriate that he's been sacked from one of the plum jobs? Is it right that he turns up back in the Lords on the Labour benches?
The way the Lords operates, there's a lot of people that are under, a lot of scrutiny. And I think it's important to say he's not broken the law, and you've said that. He hasn't done, we've established, we're not saying that he himself, but it was his.
But he might have broken the Lord's Code of Conduct, which would require him to be suspended.
That will be for the Lord's authorities to have a look at. All I can say is he hasn't done, things like other people have done, like dodgy PPE and things like that, and, sort of done. He hasn't, I think it's really, really clear he's not broken any rules or, done anything like that. But, as I say, for Peter, if he's serious about having sympathy for those victims, I would really like to see him to reach out to, the lawyers of the victims, some of the victims, and talk to them, because his knowledge, and we're not saying he's done anything wrong, but his knowledge could really help them.
Richard, would the victims welcome that?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean, anyone who can speak up and provide evidence. The other person who knows absolutely everything is Ghislaine Maxwell as well, of course.
Richard Sanders, Ian Dunt and Ayesha Hazarika, thank you all very much for joining us. That is it for this episode of The Fourcast. Until next time, goodbye.